this episode of Downloadable Content, we discuss franchises new and old. What is it about a video game series that makes us keep coming back to it again and again? Does new technology help a franchise? How about story? What makes a series jump the shark? Video game evolution is multifaceted, and some evolution has actually crossed genre boundaries. Does this help or hurt a series? Join us as we debate this subject on episode 2 of Downloadable Content. Welcome, friends and neighbors, to episode 2 of Downloadable Content, Electric Boogaloo. A squeak! A very palpable squeak! We're joined again by the previous 3. We're joined by Erica.
Hello!
Peter.
I live! For now.
And Ron.
Hello.
Hello. I know, it was hard to follow an introduction like that, I know.
It's hard to... yeah.
But yes, here we are, all again, all assembled, and we're going to be talking about video game franchises. Series that we've come to know and love, series that have made a name for themselves, whether they started back in antiquity, or relative newcomers to the game. You know, we discuss all this. We're going to discuss what makes them great, how they've evolved, how they end up, dying because of developer ineptitude, all that sort of fun stuff. And so we're going to just dive right into the conversation. We're going to start with a classic, because it is. We're going to start with Mario. We're going to start with Super Mario Brothers, a series that is 25 years young. How? And I ask you, how the hell, since we all know what the object is of a Mario game.
Bowser save the princess.
Yeah, we save the stupid whore Peach, who gets kidnapped by Bowser, and it is Mario's mission, foolish man that he is, to rescue the princess. For 25 years, we know this. We know that this is how the game is. We know how the game ends. But what the hell makes us keep coming back to this series over and over, despite knowing the objective?
Miyamoto is a god.
Besides that, we've already established that in episode 1.
We established that in the previous episode. Got it to decide. 25 years, Peter, we've known this. Why is it still viable?
Because Miyamoto is a god.
If you want an actual answer, I think the gameplay is a huge factor.
Yes, okay, Ron, we'll start with a serious answer. Go.
Gameplay is huge. The simplest thing you could do in Super Mario Brothers, going all the way back to the NES, was you either threw a fireball, you ran into a monster if you were invincible because of the star, or more often than not, you jumped on them. And it was just that simple thing of just running and jumping for hours and hours on end.
Well, that's still largely the case today. I mean, even in
though, and the challenge of making sure you get those hops correctly, or the infinite one-ups on the stairs for the flag.
And 3-1.
Yes, and even though still today, there's still that element. Even in Mario Galaxy, they're still running, they're still jumping on Goombas. There's still that element. But how come that sort of style hasn't gotten boring?
presentation has a bit to do with it.
Okay.
It's at least for me, and again, my perspective is that of an artist. It's been very interesting over the years to watch an enemy as simple as the Goomba, and you really can't get much more simplistic than a menacing-looking walking mushroom. And I mean, although I didn't know that when I was a kid, I don't know how many. Did anyone else mistake the Goombas for owls? Because I sure as hell did.
Nope.
When I was little.
I thought they were like owls.
I thought they were just flightless owls.
I feel like at least a 3.
That's what they reminded me of. But it's been very interesting to watch the progression of how these guys have gone from these little 8 bits doing the shimmy to things that can actually, like in Mario 64, chase you around. It's also been very interesting to watch the evolution of, going beyond just the jump on something or throw a fireball at it. You get into, like, the Super Nintendo Mario World. You got the ability to fly to a certain extent, if you got the proper Yoshi and ate the right shell, or just the addition of Yoshi in general, the cape.
That is true. The series, I mean, you do notice that the series keeps reinventing itself. I mean, we know the ending, we know the objective, and we know the objective for 25 years, and we'll know the objective for another 25 more. But it's, again, how you get there that is the exciting part. Again, as you just mentioned, you had in the Nintendo, I mean, you had running and jumping and fireballing, and then, taking it a step further, even Mario 3, you had the addition of the raccoon suit.
Oh my god, that raccoon suit.
That was awesome! Or the frog suit!
And the frog suit, I mean, with the flying suit, you have an added dimension. Okay, now you can actually go into the sky, which is something you couldn't do before.
Well, you could go, but you'd come back down pretty quick.
Yes, and then again, Yoshi, the introduction of Yoshi for Super Nintendo.
Nope.
Also think of, Super Mario Original 1 just had the fireball. Number 2, you had multiple characters to choose from.
That's true.
In 3, you had the raccoon suit.
Number 2.
Hold on, Peter.
Yeah, and then in Super Mario World, you had flight. Every single game of Mario has included something new or something different. The gameplay may still be the same, but the mechanism that allows you to enable the gameplay, that same gameplay, is different or enhances it somehow.
Peter, you were saying?
Well, yeah. The thing is, number 2 is kind of the black sheep of the series, though. Seriously, because in America, we get what was labeled Super Mario Bros. 2. You had 4 different characters to pick from and a completely different style of play.
Yep.
In Japan, that game was not even a Mario game at all. It was called Doki Doki Panic, which is Japanese for heart attack.
Yes, Mario 2 actually is Lost Levels, which...
yeah, technically, yes.
That was the original Mario 2. So, when I think about how we went from Mario 1, Mario 2 just basically was a much more difficult Mario 1 with the addition of the mushrooms that actually hurt you instead of help you.
Yes, the poison mushrooms.
Yes. Mario 3, I think, is where Miyamoto actually started to really let his imagination roll. And that's really what drives his success, is his imagination.
That's true. I mean, take each successive main Mario game. I mean, you had, of course, the original series on the NES. Even 3 was groundbreaking in the sense that, again, power-ups like the raccoon suit and the frog suit. Super Mario World, the introduction of Yoshi. Then Mario 64, where now Mario is in a 3D realm, where you have the addition of not just, running and jumping, but, you can, stomp, you can, slam your ass on an enemy. You could grab an enemy. you keep going up from that. You have then the GameCube, although Super Mario Sunshine really just kind of expanded on Mario 64. That was probably one of their less successive games. So, it's Mario 64, but Mario has a water gun instead.
I think the GameCube were the days when Miyamoto kind of went into a slump.
Well, everyone has bad days. And then a resurgence, on the Wii with Mario Galaxy, where now you have the added element of removal of gravity to get your objective through.
Yeah, what you think about was always the limiting factor of Mario. He's always held back by gravity. Now with Galaxy and the lack thereof of gravity, you can literally just go anywhere with Mario.
And then of course that's your main series. Then you have the other Mario games like Dr. Mario.
Mario Kart.
Or Mario Kart, yes.
Mario's been in so many spin-off games.
Mario RPG, Mario Soccer.
Mario Golf, or Malf. But yes, so I think what the general consensus here is that with each successive Mario game, the method to how you rescue that stupid...
That dumb blonde.
That dumb blonde.
No, the pink dress and stuff?
Yeah, the way you get there is always new and inventive.
Although I would put in a plug for Peach. I really don't think... You called her a whore at the beginning of the game. I really don't think she is. I think she's just a very confused nun. Because God knows Mario hasn't gotten any in 25 years.
Yeah, him or Zelda. Which we go to next.
Link, you mean?
Well, the Zelda series.
Yeah.
We move on to that series. That's another one that has been around for a long time.
23.
This is the series you see a lot more evolution, not just in what new you can do, but also how the game has evolved from the simple tiled graphics to the 3D methods of today.
All right, well, go ahead, elaborate.
Well, first Zelda, you had a top-down view, and you could see Miyamoto's imagination in all the different puzzles. Tries to create the fantasy story, that's the theme. Zelda 2, he tried to experiment a little more, make it more side-scrolling dungeon adventuring. I didn't think it really worked as well. Goes back to A Link to the Past. Now we have the Super Nintendo, more computational power, you get more elaborate puzzles, back to the top-down view. Graphics don't look so tiled anymore, even though they still are. But the real leap was with Ocarina of Time.
I agree. You had, again, the Zelda series, the objective. You know the objective, save Zelda from Ganon or Ganondorf or whatever.
Yeah, the same story over and over, generally.
But again, yes, you have, I think, Zelda was limping along for a bit, and then Ocarina of Time hit, and then threw the series back into prominence.
Also, I think Link and Zelda are genuinely likable characters. Zelda, unlike the pink dress of Mario fame, is an actual person. She actually has characteristics aside from being pink and blonde.
Yeah.
She actually is competent.
Yes.
Ocarina of Time allowed her to be more than just the princess who needed to be saved.
And I think
and Zelda is, one other point here. Zelda is actually central to the plot in many of these games because she possesses a piece of the Triforce, whereas Pink is just like, Pink. Now I'm calling her Pink. Whereas Peach is kind of more like the Ashley Graham of Resident Evil 4, sort of the whole, help me, sort of thing. Peach does nothing except
Call for help?
Except she just calls for help. Except at the end of every world, I have enclosed a jewel that will help protect you. So, things like that. Although an exception to that is Mario RPGs, where she is part of your party, and it is actually gratifying in Super Mario RPG for the Super Nintendo for her to whack enemies with a frying pan or her hand or umbrella. Yeah, it's really gratifying, but that's an exception. Zelda is much more competent.
Correct me if I'm wrong in this. Isn't Ocarina of Time the first game that got perfect scores in Japan? And what's the magazine name?
Famitsu.
Yeah, Famitsu.
But the other thing that makes Zelda, the Zelda franchise, is that the world actually is interactable in a way that you don't see in a lot of games. It actually has a lore. It actually, when you ride through Hyrule Field, on Epona, you feel like you have kind of a stake in the place. The places are familiar to you in some sense, and not just because you've played the previous games. They just have a feel about them as if you belong in that world, and that there's a point to saving it.
Also keep in mind that, as convoluted as it is, there is a timeline in Zelda. I mean,
yes.
Think about it. There is a timeline. I mean, it sounds confusing. There's YouTube videos explaining what the timeline is and how confusing it is, but there's a timeline. There actually is history of you, or the quote-unquote player, succeeding and having it continue and affect the future story.
Right.
So though Nintendo goes through Links and Zeldas like the BBC goes through doctors.
Yeah.
But, I mean, again, it's that innovative, and again, I really agree with Erica's point of, it's a much more, interactive world, Hyrule, than, say, the Mushroom Kingdom. I mean, that also helps to its appeal, and in the more recent Zelda games, there's good story in there as well.
Yes, there's phenomenal story.
There's good story in there, which when you finally get to Ganondorf, now it's an epic,
There's reasons why you want to take that Master Sword and stab him multiple times with it.
And also especially in Zelda's case, in the Zelda series, it's also experimented more with the motion capture of the Wii system, as opposed to Mario. I mean, with the Wii, you can actually use your Wiimote as Link's sword or his bow.
Yeah, the Wii games have been phenomenal for that. I remember when we first got our Wii, Twilight Princess was the very first game we purchased for it, because I had seen the game in a store display and instantly just totally fell in love with it. And I got the machine home, got it hooked up to the TV, and within minutes, I just found myself totally immersed in running around as Link, just using the controls to swing his sword and use his shield, just in a way that I couldn't believe how much fun I was having, just running around a field cutting grass, just because it was fun to swing the sword and shield.
Not to mention that Hyrule grows rupees out of the ground.
I know.
Yeah.
So there was a point. There's fun and money to be made.
It's like, if I mow the lawn, I can get instant rupees.
Well, even really just grow on trees in Hyrule.
Literally.
Yeah.
So again, it's what makes the series interesting, despite knowing the objective, is how you get there.
And again, in the case of Zelda, the updated graphics are, especially in Twilight Princess. I haven't seen any screenshots for Skyward Sword yet, but Twilight Princess. I mean, I went to the lake at sunset and I was blown away. It was just absolutely gorgeous.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So now we'll shift to another franchise, not Nintendo, because Nintendo. I mean, while those two are great, Nintendo has always been known for its flagship series and how innovative they are, especially when you have Miyamoto at the helm. I'm going to shift gears now to a non-Nintendo franchise. I'm going to shift to Resident Evil, which started life on the PS1 and now has installments across platforms. It started off, its first 3 games were started off on Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 were on the PlayStation. Resident Evil 0 was GameCube only. Resident Evil 4 was a GameCube exclusive until Capcom went, oh, we can make more money if we release this cross-platform. So, Resident Evil 4 also made it to the PS2 and eventually the Wii. Resident Evil 5 has been released on PS3 and 360. And then, of course, you have all of its various filler games. So, I ask you, what does a game that started off with shooting zombies and having horrible voice acting, how did that manage to become the multi-million-dollar franchise that it is today?
Has the writing improved at all?
Yes.
Because I thought you mentioned the horrible voice acting, and I remember the writing was, well, it could be sneezed at.
Yes, you had classic gems in Resident Evil 1, like, here's a lockpick. It would be great if you, Jill, the master of unlocking, took it.
Well, I think a lot of what you had in the back in the days of the PlayStation 1, voice acting was on the rise. Now we have the CD-ROM, allowed for actually have voiceovers and multiple voiceovers, not just a few little snippets in the game. But I noticed that during those days, the voice acting in most games really wasn't very good. It was the new thing.
So you're saying it wasn't exclusive to Resident Evil?
No, Resident Evil was just part of the phenomenon, not the phenomenon.
Yeah, that's true.
What I think really helped Resident Evil get started was the new concept of the survival horror game, the genre. It really was one of the flagship titles that started that genre. It was unlike anything anyone had seen in games prior. It was literally breaking new ground.
Yep.
And that helped it. It was in the right spot at the right time when people wanted to see something new, and that's what helped propel it forward. As the technology advanced, they were able to expand on the experience much more. I watch you play one of the Resident Evil games on the GameCube, and it was far more, immersive in just the experience of seeing how much more detail, and not just looking at it, but also listening to it. It was a lot. It just felt like they were really trying to get the experience all together, the survival horror experience, and not just be another, okay, here we have another game here.
I agree. I think the technology did help the series. However, you run into some debate with Resident Evil 4 because, oh yes, and I forgot to mention Resident Evil Code Veronica, which started on the Dreamcast before coming over to PS2. But, Resident Evil 4 started to shift away from what the series had been known for, which was eerie sort of gameplay, a lot of, sudden, sharp, intense moments, and puzzle solving, which was a hallmark of the first 3 games. Resident Evil 4 did a complete 180. Puzzle solving was virtually non-existent, and it ended up Resident Evil 4 began the series push toward much more action-driven, keep the story moving type of game, which in doing so lost some fans.
I wonder if they gained fans as a result as well.
I think the main reason why they see that switch from 3 to 4 is 3 came out right before the Xbox hit, I believe, and then Halo came out shortly after that. And I think Halo is what essentially changed up a lot of the shooters of whether it's horror or first-person shooters. I think Halo is the main reason why that changed.
Halo did for first-person shooters what GoldenEye did for the N64. So,
well, on the console scene, yes, it did. On the PC, it hadn't done anything had already been done on a PC prior.
Yeah, and I think Halo was the main reason why you see that switch from survival horror in 3 to what I would call horror action in 4. Because you're not really surviving as much as it is dealing with zombies that are now wielding chainsaws and coming at you, and you just have to mow them all down as fast as you can.
Right. I mean, Resident Evil 3 was released in 1999. The Xbox came out in 2001. But yeah, I mean, suddenly, since Resident Evil 4 didn't, come out, until the generation with the GameCube, people might have been looking for a change at that point. I know Capcom certainly was at that point, because it definitely, in terms of the story, spoiler alert, Raccoon City gets obliterated at the end of Resident Evil 3. And now that you just destroyed the setting for the first 3 games, it basically became a now what?
Yeah, I think also that's one of the good and bad things about Resident Evil. The story is amazing. That's a good thing. The bad thing is the story is so freaking convoluted. Like, literally after Game 3, you literally just saw the government just drop a nuke on a city. What are you supposed to do now that you're just this normal? You're supposed to be this normal human being. The entire U.S. government just dropped a nuke to get rid of this zombie problem, and it's still there. What are you supposed to do to save the world or save yourself, or whatever you want to do with that story?
Yeah, I agree. I think Resident Evil 4 gained fans as well as, it lost fans because, the purists were going to be disappointed that the element of the puzzle solving that was so prevalent in the early installments of the series was now gone. Resident Evil 4, if you've played it, it flows. There's no, backtrack. There's really no backtracking, to grab, to find a piece to a door lock. You don't have to. The game doesn't force you to go from one end of a police station to the other to find the device that trips to find the valve handle so you could rupture the tank to extinguish the flame on the helicopter. They removed the puzzle element completely, and in Resident Evil 5 it just became totally no puzzles at all, just total action movie. And I think you lost some fans in the process, because by the time Resident Evil 5 came out, the over the shoulder shooter type games were no longer new and innovative. And I think by the time Resident Evil 5 came out, really the only thing that was keeping the series going was the story. Because by the time now Resident Evil 5 happened, because there are still questions and loose ends that were created in the earlier games, i.e. Wesker,
oh my god.
Albert Wesker, yes, who you wanted to kill back in 1999 or 97 when Resident Evil 1 came out. And now finally finally you get the epic showdown with Wesker. So
you mentioned that you were thinking that maybe the Resident Evil series lost some fan base, and I'm not a big fan of survival horror because I just don't have the strong enough nerves to play these games. But I know I was wondering if you thought the transition from straight survival horror to over-the-shoulder shooter, in that transition and the loss of fan base, do you think those fans kind of maybe shifted over to the Silent Hill side of the force? Because that maintained that, as far as I know, that maintained the survival horror.
Yes, survival. The Silent Hill series really, not a whole lot of change. I mean, Silent Hill and Resident Evil, while similar, Silent Hill is just overall creepy.
Silent Hill is there's a stylistic difference between Resident Evil and Silent Hill. Resident Evil is the sudden shock. Oh my God, there's a zombie. What am I supposed to do? Silent Hill is this very eerie sort of like Twin Peaks style of like this environment of I have no clue where I am. There's no noise. There's no soundtrack. It's just me by myself. What the hell is going on in this stupid town? And then you wake up after falling asleep or getting attacked by dogs, and you're in this, what I can only describe as a nightmarish torture scene of like rusted metal and blood, and there's these inhuman abominations crawling towards you, and you're like, oh my God,
Pyramid
what
Head.
the F is going on here? I'm gonna die. What the hell?
Yeah.
All I have is a stupid crowbar.
Yeah, it's Silent Hill is much more eerie and creepy. Resident Evil is, as Ron mentioned, much more of it goes much more for the shock value. Just like dum-de-dum-de-dum, Resident Evil zombies, and then suddenly, BAM! 8 million crows shoot out of a glass window, and it's this very sudden shock thing. And Silent Hill is not. It's just like I am equipped only with a wooden plank with a rusted nail in here. Hell.
I can't kill anything. Ever. You can only, like, Silent Hill 3, I think, you couldn't kill a single thing in that game. All you could do was shoot it and slow it down.
Whatever the case, I don't know. I mean, those are two different types of survival horror games. So, Erica, I don't know if the fans that were lost by Resident Evil shift into action-oriented games, I don't know if that really, was noticeable.
Okay, I was just tossing it out there as a possibility because I really don't follow the genres, but it seemed like, if one kind of staple series wasn't doing it for them anymore, then another one might.
Yeah. I mean, I liked the series, but I mean, I could tell that, it was kind of jumped the shark a little. 4 was great. The jump from 3 to 4 I thought was an amazing game, and Resident Evil 4 won accolade after accolade after award after award. Resident Evil 5 came around and it was like, okay, now it's a bit old hat. So I think, Resident Evil 4, basically it was a hit or miss as it got toward its later games. I mean, I enjoyed them because, I was fascinated by the story. Resident Evil, the story, is much more science-driven as opposed to Silent Hill, which there's just a lot of bad juju. So, alrighty. Well, we've talked about a few franchises. When we come back for our second half, we will talk more franchises. downloadable content as we continue our talk about franchises, video game series that we've known and loved. We are still here. Yes, we are. Okay, good. So,
Yeah.
continuing the discussion on the evolution of video game series, here's a series that is constantly evolving and reinventing itself with each successive game in the series. Let's go to Final Fantasy.
Oh boy, where to begin with this?
Well,
Its roots are in Nintendo, but I do remember that for me, it was when I first played the original on the NES. I remember the Dungeons and Dragons references were not subtle to begin with.
no, yes.
It was not subtle, but at the same time, it was still unique enough to be its own game. And then when you see how more of course, in America we got the original Final Fantasy II was actually Final Fantasy IV, but you could still see the trends. Kind of like how Mario has its own symbols and characters that keep recurring. Final Fantasy does as well, but in each new Final Fantasy, it's a new story. They're reinventing the game with new gameplay elements. Some very experimental, and some ideas better than others.
Well, I know. I mean, my introduction to the Final Fantasy series, like many others, was Final Fantasy VII.
Very good game. It actually was a point where the game was one of its biggest leaps in reinventing itself.
And we'll get to that. I mean, after playing 7, 8, and 9, I went back and started playing 1 through 6. And here was a situation where, you had to make up for what we now consider bad graphics. You had to, you had to make up, with plot. And, as with each successive game in the old series, the writing got better and better. It was evolving from, just, hey, 4 heroes of light, find the crystals, beat the bad guy, win a prize, to these sweeping storylines of Final Fantasy IV and 6. 5, unfortunately, had the dubious distinction of being released in between those two games.
Well, 5 did have the job system, which was pretty cool, although that, I think, was pioneered in number 3.
Yes. But with each successive game, the story got better and better. There were definitely some innovations that the series had made, some of which were better well received than others. Like Final Fantasy II, where they decided, hey, let's get rid of experience points and level up individual stats instead.
First and last time they tried that one.
Yeah, when it was realized that in order for your characters to gain any sort of statistical advantage, you had to constantly keep them near death.
Yeah. More often than not, you're running around that game with half HP, almost no MP, and more often than not, you're beating on your own party members more so than you are beating on the monsters themselves.
They did fix that in the Game Boy Advance remake. It does play a lot better.
And then of course, of course you cannot talk about Final Fantasy without talking about the music.
Oh, hell no.
Uematsu is a demigod.
No, he's a god of music. Miyamoto is a god of video games.
You have to, that was one of the things that, it's one of the hallmarks of Final Fantasy is the music. I mean, yes, yes, to us, if you play the games, it just sounds like a lot of bleep, bloop, bleep, bleep, bloop. But, this series spawns soundtrack after soundtrack.
You know that as the technology has advanced through each generation of consoles, the music has improved. So has the presentation and overall storytelling. It's not just a matter of, hey, it's shinier. They went all out to improve every aspect as each new generation of technology became available.
Right. I mean, just the leap from 6 to 7.
Or how about 3 to 4?
Yeah.
And
I
keep in
know
mind,
you guys have not seen 3 on the NES. I've had the opportunity to sample it on an emulator, and going from the NES to the Super Nintendo was a huge leap.
Yeah. And keep in mind too, like for the music, like that music's been used in orchestras. New York orchestras has performed Final Fantasy music soundtracks.
Wow.
They use Final Fantasy music in the Olympics.
Yeah, so it's become recognized the world over for how good the score is. It's regularly featured in concerts.
Well, I also, I mean, even on the same console, you go, there's been a progression. I noticed the first time I ever saw it, Peter showed it to me when we were first dating. The difference between Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VI. Even within the same console, there was a massive shift forward in not just graphics, but I mean just gameplay and everything. It was just a huge leap. And
that's one
6 remains your favorite to this day, doesn't it?
6 is my favorite to this day. 12 comes in second place.
Yeah, I agree. 12 is my favorite.
Keep in mind too that like every single Final Fantasy has had 2 unique things to them. One, the storylines are completely different in every single game except for 10 and 10-2. And there's entirely new combats in every single game.
Yep.
More or less. I mean,
they may use similar styles of like the ATB.
It's been menu driven, but yeah, I can see what you mean. But they've tried to remix the combat system to introduce a new element or remix an old element. So the combat it's really more of an evolutionary step, part of the experimentation that Square keeps trying to do in order to keep the series relevant.
That's very true. I mean, but there are some that think as the series gets, with each successive entry, yes, now with their new generation of systems, do you think that, say, Square has sacrificed some of its good storytelling for better graphics?
That's biggest concern I have, especially with the PS3 version, Final Fantasy 13. I suppose it would probably also apply for the Xbox 360 version. I've been told all you have to do is press X in every battle. Repeatedly press X, walk to the next battle, repeatedly press X, and just keep doing this until you finish the game.
So it's not so much a sacrifice of story, but of gameplay.
Yeah.
I mean, Final Fantasy 13, for the very first time in a numbered series, I'm excluding the online games, 11 and 14. For the very first time in the main Final Fantasy game, you do not have full control over your party.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess in Final Fantasy 12, you had the Gambit system in which you could, automate commands for your party. But at least in Final Fantasy 12, you still had the ability to manually control every character.
Yep.
In Final Fantasy 13, you don't have that option. You control your party leader. That is it.
Right. Now, I consider that a detriment. However, we've pointed out a couple of other Final Fantasies where they've tried something experimental and it hasn't worked.
Guardian Force system.
Right. And that leveling the leveling abilities as opposed to leveling the character. But one thing I will give Square, or Squeenix if you like, when they've done something like that, every time they've done it, they've only made that mistake once and then they have never repeated the sin. So if there's to be a 15 that hits the consoles and isn't one of these MMO types, I think we may get away from that, just because I don't think that they'll make that mistake again, because it is. I liked the theme of 13. I didn't agree with a lot of people who said, it's all sci-fi and stuff, it's supposed to be a fantasy game. I'm
Well-
sorry, 7, which was one of the most popular Final Fantasies ever, was a
Steampunk.
The first Final Fantasy had sci-fi elements. The floating castle.
yeah.
That was like the one of the last dungeons of the game. Not the last, but one of the last. It had time travel.
For my thing with Final Fantasy 13, for all of the people that hate on it, like I think the tutorial, 20 hours tutorial, I think that Final Fantasy 13 was a response to the critics saying 12 was too open-ended, and so they essentially made 13 for the first 20 hours essentially a rail shooter. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the joke of you walk forward, you turn right, you fight a monster. You walk forward, turn left, fight a monster. That is unfortunately true for like the first 20 hours, and once you get to the open section of the game, it finally starts feeling like a full Final Fantasy game. It's silent. You start running across the plains, you're seeing all these monsters walking around, you're literally just enjoying the environment that starts feeling like a freaking game. And in terms of the combat system, I actually thought that was really well done. I mean, sure, you only control your party leader, but with the paradigm shift system in terms of, like, customizing what roles everyone's going to fulfill, and not to mention the AI is actually pretty competent.
That's a first.
Surprising, I know, but, like, say, I mean, for example, you start getting into low HP, they start healing you. You say, and then you shift into a quote-unquote buffing system where you're you're trying to put on like your haste and your protects, and they do all that in order. They put on like from the most important one, which for you would probably be like shield or haste or something like that. The first thing they usually do is they go haste, and then they start doing everything else. They actually are competent. Surprising.
Good. I'm looking forward to getting further along in Final Fantasy 13. Because, I mean, that was some of the criticism for Final Fantasy XII, was that it played too much like an MMO. And I actually enjoyed the fact that it was open-ended like that. Basically, the game said, okay, you have to go here in order to advance the story, but you don't have to go here right now.
Yeah.
We're pointing to you on the map that if you want to advance the story, you have to go here. We're not going to move any further until you go here. But in the meantime, feel free to do anything else you want.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like 12 for that too. I like that open world. 12 almost reminds me of the .hack series where, like, it was that MMO type of atmosphere. You could literally go around and do whatever you wanted, and whenever you felt ready, like, you could advance the story, you could go and advance the story.
So, I mean, that's... Square, you need to have that nice, delicate balance, because I don't particularly like RPGs that are way too linear, which allow no room for exploration. The biggest offender of that one is Kingdom Hearts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The biggest offender, I think, in that, and we'll shift to another series, because we've basically come to an agreement that Final Fantasy is a series that continues to revolutionize itself.
Well, Square doesn't want to do the same thing twice, but they still want to keep it familiar.
They still want to keep it familiar, they still want to keep it fresh, so each successive game is an experiment. I don't really think Final Fantasy has jumped the shark yet.
There'll be another one.
Oh, I know there will, although with how bad Final Fantasy XIV is, Square might want to consider pulling out of the online market.
Depends how much money they're making or losing.
That's true. I will now go to a series that unfortunately died before its time. I will shift to another RPG series, and that is Xenosaga.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is a franchise. Now, we've been talking all episode long about how these franchises have remained viable and how they keep things fresh and interesting. Now here's an example of one that didn't.
I blame too.
Or tried to be too experimental. Xenosaga 2 is an example of being way too experimental. In this case, a large part was the battle system. the battle system was very, very clunky, and instead of just hitting the enemy, each enemy was divided up into different body zones. And
do that in the right order, and
yeah, then
it became something of a slog.
In order to critically hit the enemy, you had to hit the enemy in the correct, the correct order of body zones.
Body blow, left.
Yeah, it's and you had to guess the order. You didn't find out. You had to guess, so there was a lot of guessing, and if you hit the wrong body zone, it'd be, almost as bad as just missing the character, because it would do almost no damage. And yes, it became work. And
that was the problem. And the other thing that hurt that is two things. I cannot remember the composer's name, but he did good. But he was no Yasunori Mitsuda.
Yes, the score, I think, was a minor thing for...
Yuki Kajiura. No, Yuki Kajiura.
Okay.
I think, I don't think the score was a major thing, because, yes, the score from 1 to 2, it became less orchestral and more electronica and techno.
Well, the thing that did it was that... for one thing, the battle music in the original Xenosaga, Mitsuda's masterpiece there, was great battle music. The only music that was worth a rip in Xenosaga 2 was during cutscenes.
Yes.
And that might feel like a minor thing, but it hurts the game overall experience, because it's really in the battles in a role-playing game like that where you spend most of your time actually playing. The other thing that hurt it, and again, for some people this is going to be a minor thing, but I'm sorry, I fell in love with Cosmos in the original Xenosaga, and whoever idea it was to have her voiced by a 12-year-old needs to be shot. In number 2.
Yeah, they changed voice actors, and actually the voice acting for 2 did cause a lot of hate mail to be generated by the fans, so they ended up like, okay, we'll give in, you win, and brought back, pretty much one's cast for 3, so...
Yeah.
Also keep in mind, too, I think, I don't know, one of the things, like, why I was lambasted by the critics was there was a lot of cutscenes. A lot of cutscenes in Xenosaga 1 and 2.
That is true, and 3 as well. There was, yes.
It's okay if they're not. And there were a lot of cutscenes in the original in Xenogears.
But I remember Xenosaga 1 where I literally was. Thank God they included the option to skip cutscenes, because I can't imagine what would have happened if you couldn't skip. But I remember where it's like in the beginning of the game, it literally was like a half hour's worth of cutscenes, one boss fight, another half hour's worth of cutscenes, and then a second boss fight. I died at that second boss fight. I had to restart, go all the way back, and if I didn't have that skip option, I would have just lost out on like an hour and a half of my time.
Right.
Yeah, the epically long cutscenes, while good, weren't help, because that is true. When you have cutscenes that are 30 or 45 minutes long, you're like, I've got shit to do.
It does come to a point where you wonder if you're playing a game or watching a TV show.
That is true, and unfortunately, a lot of what happened in Xenosaga 2 ultimately doomed a series that was supposed to go 6 games.
6 games over 3 consoles, I believe, was the original plan, and it had to be cut short to 3 games on 1 console.
Yeah.
So at least Sagashi was allowed one more game to release to wrap it up.
But here's the thing. Here's a question. Final Fantasy, has each game is experimental. What made Final Fantasy succeed, whereas say Xenosaga did not?
Budget, I would imagine. Square at this point in their career has enough where they can afford that kind of mistake. Also, just general industry trend. You screw up, that is the end of you.
So Final Fantasy will have a lot more forgiving those staple games.
Right. They've got a backlog of things that says, well, hey, we can make this up. You're a relatively independent or newbie guy, forget it. If you got one shot and one shot alone, and if you screw that up, you're done.
That's why I gotta say Takahashi really has been blessed, because he was given a second chance, and he was allowed to at least wrap it up. Even after screwing up, he was allowed to say, okay, you can get one more game to at least wrap this up. He wasn't just cut loose, like most game developers would be after a big mistake, like Xenosaga 2.
Yeah. I think the other than the stylistic genres like Final Fantasy's fantasy, Xenosaга's sci-fi-ish, I think the main differences between the two are the stories. Final Fantasy's is more of a simple save the world, whereas Xenosaга's is more of like a philosophical sort of thing.
Yeah.
Very philosophical.
And isn't it wonderful?
That is true, that Xenosaga is a lot more cerebral. If you don't know your Nietzsche or your Carl Jung, forget it. It's
You're gonna miss a lot.
All the subtitles for Xenosaga are based on Nietzsche, weren't they?
They're all Nietzsche.
They're all in German.
Yep. And that was actually the reason I started reading Nietzsche was because I said I need to understand this. I need to know what the link is.
I mean, thank God that the third Xenosaga game brought back the Xeno Bible, as it were, because you could pull it up at any time during the game.
Yeah.
And
Thank God for that, because I literally spent 3 hours just reading that so I can understand what the freaking story was.
So,
But I mean that some people are going to consider that a weakness. I consider it an incredible strength, because if you're really looking for just something that's got that kind of freaking sane depth, I mean, you're not going to find it too many other places.
that's true. I mean, that's a risk in itself, trying to make a game that is incredibly cerebral like that.
Yeah, but look at the scale of people that just want like a simple sit-down beer and pretzels game, and the scale of people that want that psychological, philosophical thriller. I would say it's at least 100 to 1.
Yeah, it's a risk, but I mean, I thought it worked well. I ended up finishing Xenosaga 2 and 3 because the questions posed by the story in Xenosaga 1 was enough to make me want to know how the hell the series was going to end.
I promise you I'll get there.
And not to mention the fact that, hey, more Cosmos. Bring it on. All right, so I'm going to shift gears now to one more franchise. There's a billion franchises we can go on, but, I think we have about maybe 8 or 9 minutes before I call this one. So the last one I'm going to go with is Metal Gear Solid. Shifting back away from the RPGs and back toward, an action game with plot. Massive quantities of plot. It started life on the NES with the first Metal Gear game and the infamous "I feel asleep" line. And
How does one feel asleep? I'm sorry.
That's just the days and age where English translations were done by Japanese people who couldn't speak English.
So
Metal Gear was born.
Metal Gear. We're gonna go to the Metal Gear series, but more specifically Metal Gear Solid, since it was really Metal Gear Solid that brought the series to the fore.
It was very big in the NES days. It just kind of disappeared after that. Then it resurfaced on the PlayStation.
Right. It started, and Metal Gear Solid was on the PlayStation, which at the time was a bit innovative because, just like in Metal Gear for the NES, the emphasis was not so much on kill all the enemies, but more stealth.
I remember playing the demo for Metal Gear Solid, and I was still that mentality of I could just hide wherever and they won't see me. The AI found my tracks in the snow, found me and killed me right there. What the hell?
I mean, for the first time you're looking at this, going, the AI is, can hear you, can see footprints, can see shadows, and you're like, whoa!
And if you
Sort
put
of
on the
hiding
wrong
in a cardboard
box,
box.
wrong cardboard box, and you're done.
You know, and the emphasis was not solely on kill everyone. It was tactical. I mean, right? It says right on the front of the game. You know, tactical espionage action. So,
Yeah.
so you know, what keeps the series viable today? Since it's now spanned a few, it's spanned a generation, several of them.
Plot. I would say mostly plot.
Hideo Kojima, yes, admittedly, Hideo Kojima is an excellent storyteller who loves to fuck with everyone.
He
Yeah.
really created a cast of memorable characters, like Revolver Ocelot.
Boss.
Was that?
Boss, the boss. Both Big Boss and the boss.
Oh,
Yes.
yes, for Metal Gear Solid 3. You know, Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation was totally unique. I mean, the boss battle against Psycho Mantis,
Oh yes.
where, you know,
He actually reads your memory. He actually will read your memory card, see if you had any other Konami saves, and will actually point them out to you.
and, you know,
I see you played Resident Evil.
yeah, I see you like Castlevania, you know, and, you know, there was just, you know, that boss battle in particular where the game predicts your every move, and you think, how the hell do I beat this? And when you realize, oh, change the controller, put it into the other slot,
All of a sudden, he can't read your mind anymore.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you're
Like, I mean, that is so interesting, like so innovative. Think about it, like that. No one else has done that except for, I think, Eternal Darkness did that with like you, like it would like mind fuck with you, like it erase your memory card or controller
so
couldn't
many
be
effects. I
found.
love that game. But Metal Gear Solid, I mean, again, Ron, you said it best. Plot predominantly was what drove the series. From, you know, the conversations, the codec conversations in the first one, to the whiny Pratt conversation between Raiden and Rose in the second game.
Get love Bloom on a battlefield.
Oh, yes. Metal Gear, and then you know, then you started getting really innovative with the gameplay in Metal Gear Solid 3 when camouflage becomes important.
Yeah.
Metal Gear Solid 3, you know, innovated the series by not only forcing you to blend in with your surroundings, but also making you no longer could rely on finding military rations. Being in the jungle, you had to hunt animals. And, you know, and also, Metal Gear Solid 3 made use of the PS2's game internal clock. Because say you put down, you know, you save the game, and you don't pick it up again for 2 weeks. All that food that you hunted, the game will read the game clock. It will know that it was 2 weeks since you last played it,
It'll go bad.
and all your food will have gone bad.
And I think Solid lost some health too
Yeah,
because he was like starving a bit.
yeah. Your character, Naked Snake, would lose some health, and your food would go bad. And if you ate it, a big chunk of your health would go. You know,
It's hard to put a game down for a while and pick it back up because life happens.
I mean, and even in boss battles, and you know, if you try to save your game in the middle of a boss battle, which you could do, you know, especially when you're fighting the end.
Oh my god.
So camouflage became important, and also the advent of close quarters combat (CQC). And then, of course, you have Metal Gear Solid 4, which ties up the series pretty much. But a large part of the game, at least for me, was plot. And, you know, because Kojima was a master, and is a master, of the plot twist. You know, you have to play the games to the end. And by the end, I mean post-credits.
Generally, yes.
because everything you knew suddenly gets flipped on its head. You know, I'm talking about the last couple of lines from Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 and 3.
And 4.
So, that's a series I think, you know, has survived the test of time.
Or probably will.
Well, it's certainly now having a life on the PSP, where now they're releasing filler games, you know, to fill in the gaps between, you know, successive games.
Also alternate timelines.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of space between Metal Gear Solid 3 and Metal Gear Solid 1. There's about 35 years between the games.
Yeah.
So Konami has a lot of room to work with. So that's basically that. You two are quiet over there.
Because we're not terribly familiar with the Metal Gear series.
I've played Metal Gear on the NES. I've finished Metal Gear Solid 1 on the PlayStation. Beyond that, it's mostly you guys.
Regardless, Metal Gear Solid is a very, very interesting system because of great storytelling, predominantly. As is the case with, you know, other series that have great storytelling. I mean, BioShock, for example, is still very young. I mean, it only has 2 games. But I hope that goes on for a while, particularly because of the excellent plot. So there you go. Franchises, long-standing franchises. How they stay fresh, how they didn't stay fresh. And I think that we've come to a consensus that, you know, to keep the series alive and going, you need to be experimental, but also retain some sense of the familiarity that made the series great to begin with.
Yep.
The basic blueprint for a successful franchise is fun gameplay. Doesn't have to be the repetitive gameplay, just fun. Great soundtracks and a good plot.
In other words, good experience.
Yeah.
There we go. All good. On our next episode, episode 3, we talk about legislation.
Oh boy.
Oh,
jeez.
Oh yes.
Well, this is important. Should be discussed about because there's a lot of FUD going around that just needs to be cleared up.
Well, we all know that we have, you know, there's video game legislation, the violent video games controversy, parents who want the government to raise their children, but finally, for the first time, one such video game-related court case makes it to the Supreme Court, which is something that we will be discussing. So, on that happy note, for Peter, Erica, and Ron, I'm Brian. And again, if anyone who hears these podcasts wants to be in on a future one, let me know, and we'll get you in on the next recording session. On that note, have a good night.
Bye.
bye.
Good night.